All right, let's get into one of the most pivotal and honestly, one of the most mysterious stories in the entire book of Genesis. We're talking about a huge, life-altering promise, some really deep doubt, and a super strange ceremony that involves a flaming torch. Yeah, it's a wild one.
So put yourself in this situation for a second. What if you were told that you were going to be the father of a great nation? I mean, that your family would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. Sounds pretty amazing, right? But here's the catch. You're old, your wife is way past childbearing age, and you don't have a single kid, not one. Well, this is the exact spot a man named Abraham finds himself in, and it's what sets the stage for this absolutely incredible encounter. So first up, let's really dig into this huge gap between what Abraham was promised and what his actual life looked like. Okay, so on one side of the equation, you've got this incredible, world-changing promise from God. And we're not just talking about having a kid or two. No, this is about founding an entire nation. This gigantic promise, it really becomes the bedrock of Abraham's whole journey. But then you look at his reality, and it's the total opposite. He and his wife, Sarah, they're old. Childless. I mean, from any normal human point of view, this promise wasn't just unlikely, it was flat out impossible. It felt like the clock had totally run out. So, when you're staring at that kind of impossibility, that massive chasm between the promise and your real life, what do? Well, Abraham does something that is so human, so relatable. He takes his doubt and he goes straight to God with it.
And you can just feel how raw and honest this question is. He's not being rude or disrespectful. He's basically just saying, look, how is this supposed to work? These promises sound amazing, but I'm still childless. I don't have a son. He's asking for some kind of proof, right? A sign that this unbelievable promise is actually going to come true.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. This is the crucial part. How does God respond? Not with anger. There's no punishment for his doubt. Instead of telling him off, God decides to meet Abraham right where he is, in the middle of his doubt, and he does it by making the promise official. He doesn't just say the words again. He kicks off the creation of a covenant.
So what in the world is a covenant anyway? You got to understand, this is way more than just a simple contract. In the ancient world, a covenant was the most serious, most binding agreement you could possibly make. It was a sacred oath, and to break one, well, that meant you were literally calling down a curse on your own head. And that brings us to one of the strangest, but also one of the most powerful rituals in the entire Bible. This is how God gives Abraham the assurance he's looking for, and believe me, it's in a way that is super visual and something you will not forget. So God tells Abraham to get a very specific set of animals together. A heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon. Now this might sound bizarre to us, but these precise instructions, this was like a well-known formula back then. It's how you sealed a major, legally binding treaty in the ancient Near East. Okay, so the ceremony itself happens in 3 really distinct symbolic steps. First step, Abraham gets the animals ready. He actually cuts them in half and arranges the pieces to create a kind of pathway between them. Step 2, instead of walking through it himself, Abraham is put into this deep, even terrifying sleep. He's just a witness here, not a participant. And then, step 3, a smoking firepot and a blazing torch, which are symbols of God's own holy presence, they pass right through that pathway, and they pass through alone.
And this is the absolute key to the whole thing. It is so radical for its time. See, normally both people making the deal would walk between those animal pieces. It was a way of saying, if I break this promise, may what happened to these animals happen to me. It's intense, right? But here, Abraham is totally out of the picture. He's asleep. Only God passes through. And what that means is that God is putting the entire weight of the promise and the entire curse if it fails, squarely on his own shoulders.
So with the covenant sealed in this incredibly dramatic way, with God literally putting his own reputation on the line, he then doubles down. He reaffirms and even expands on the 2 core promises he made to Abraham. The promise gets broken down into 2 very real, tangible things. First, descendants. Not just a few, but descendants as countless as the stars you can see in the night sky. And second, land. A specific, huge piece of territory for them to call their own, stretching all the way from Egypt to the Euphrates River. See, these aren't just vague hopes anymore. They are now sworn, guaranteed realities. But there's a pretty big catch to the timeline. God makes it clear that this isn't going to happen overnight. He tells Abraham that his descendants will actually have to go through 400 years of hardship in a foreign land first.
So even inside this incredible promise, there's this really long, really difficult waiting period built right into the deal.
So, after all that, after the doubt, the bizarre ceremony, the promise being locked in, the story gives us this really powerful picture of what true faith actually looks like in this kind of situation.
You know, the real climax of this story isn't just the promise itself, it's Abraham's reaction. The text says it so simply. Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. That moment, his belief, his trust, that was the turning point.
And here's the takeaway on faith. Faith, in this story, is not just wishful thinking. Think about it. Abram's situation hadn't changed one bit. He was still old, still childless. His faith was all about trusting in the character of the one making the promise. He believed God simply because of who God is, even when all the physical evidence screamed the opposite. So, to wrap things up, this ancient story gives us some really timeless lessons, doesn't it? We see that honest doubt, it's not a deal breaker for faith. In fact, it can be the very thing that leads to a deeper encounter. We learn that God's covenant with us isn't a two-way contract. It's a one-sided promise that He guarantees Himself. And, maybe most importantly, we see that real faith is based on the trustworthiness of God, not on our own circumstances.
And that leaves us with one final, big question to think about. We've seen Abraham's very real human doubt get met by God's absolutely unbreakable oath. So it makes you wonder, right? What does it really mean for us to trust a promise that seems completely and utterly impossible?